More than 12,000 years ago, the meltdown of the last ice age produced catastrophic tidal waves flooding vast areas of the Earth before what we think of as history began. Rich coastal lands, warm enough for early peoples to establish civilized societies, were transformed into an underworld, drowning our past. Now, with modern technology, a forgotten chapter in the human story emerges from the deep. Off India's west coast, sonar readings revealed two astonishing underwater cities, each covering 10 square miles and flooded no less than 7,000 years ago. More than 2,000 artifacts have so far been brought up from the sea bottom. It could be the world's oldest civilization yet found. 4,000 miles away off Japan, divers have discovered a submerged stone circle of gigantic size. It may have been carved by the Jomon, a mysterious people who inhabited these islands more than 12,000 years ago. Nearby, off Taiwan, massive submerged walls have recently been discovered. Until the end of the Ice Age, this structure would have stood above water on land that once connected Taiwan to China. Yet no trace remains of the civilization that built it. I've spent a decade combing the world for clues about the origins of civilization. In doing so, I've occasionally followed highly speculative leads, some of which I now realize have led me wide of the mark. This has attracted a lot of criticism, some of it richly deserved. But none of it's convinced me that there couldn't be a big missing chapter in man's early history. Science says that humans exactly like us have existed for 100,000 years. But so far, archaeology has only been able to find evidence of steps towards civilization around 10,000 years ago, with the onset of agriculture. What puzzles me is what were we doing with ourselves during the previous 90,000 years? The conventional view says that around 5,000 years ago, man started to develop monumental architecture and the first cities independently and coincidentally in Egypt and the Mediterranean, in Mesopotamia, and soon after in India. But it's now beginning to be recognized that the origins of civilization stretched thousands of years deeper into the past, as far back as the end of the Ice Age. Yet strangely, archaeologists don't consider the dramatic flooding that took place during the same period, which might have concealed vital evidence. I think it's time to challenge this oversight. During the Ice Age, large parts of the Earth were covered in ice sheets 2 miles thick. But when the ice melted, billions of gallons of water were released into 3 distinct pulses between 7 and 17,000 years ago. Sea level rose by almost 400 feet, flooding low-lying areas and producing the landmass we recognize today. An area larger than North America and Australia combined, most of it enjoying a benevolent climate where civilization could flourish, disappeared forever. This might explain why stories preserved by hundreds of cultures speak of a great flood that destroyed a former civilization. From the loss of Atlantis to Noah leading the animals 2 by 2 into the ark, people have handed down such stories by word of mouth for thousands of years, but scholars dismiss them as fantasies. With technological advances, underwater archaeology is able to probe those areas of the world submerged at the end of the Ice Age. But most marine archaeologists are looking for shipwrecks, not the submerged traces of a lost civilization that they don't believe ever existed. I think there's room for an independent approach. I'm not a scientist, but a journalist, and I don't have the funding of a marine institute. But already my search has begun to produce evidence which fundamentally challenges the conventional view. The beginning of agriculture and the earliest settlements. The first art. The origins of religion and the earliest spiritual traditions. In short, the very beginnings of civilization. My journey begins on Malta, now surrounded by the Mediterranean, but during the Ice Age part of a huge landmass with a favourable climate, linked to Europe via a land bridge to Sicily. Despite its small size today, Malta represents a turning point in the history of civilization and religion. Archaeologists believe its temples are the first and oldest anywhere in the world. And such temples, built of megaliths or big stones, some of them so huge it's hard to imagine how they were moved. This is Gigantea. Only a third of its original height now remains, but it still seems, as Maltese folklore has it, like the work of giants. It's thought to be about 5,700 years old, more than 1,000 years older than Stonehenge in England or the pyramids of Egypt. It's one of a group of imposing and sophisticated megalithic temples on Malta. But the mystery is, there's no background to them.
The people who worked with these gigantic stones clearly weren't beginners. They already knew what they were doing.
But nowhere on Malta, and nowhere in the world, have the forerunners to these temples been found. Perhaps the archaeologists are wrong to confine their search to sites on land. Because the seas have risen so dramatically since the Ice Age, there's a real need to look underwater. The trail of missed clues begins here in Grand Harbour, Valletta. We have ancient accounts which continue right through until the 17th century that speak of an enormous megalithic temple partially submerged in the waters of Grand Harbour. And then those accounts stop, and today no trace remains. Then in 1999, reports surfaced on the internet that another underwater temple had been located a few miles away off the coast at Slima. Over the following year, I made more than 50 dives in the area where the ruins were said to lie, but was unable to relocate them. Perhaps the seagrass had obscured them,